Hi, lovelies. To me, nothing says fall quite like the smell of pumpkin spice goodies baking up in the kitchen. So today I'm gonna be sharing an amazing recipe for these pumpkin spice scones with a maple glaze that I think you guys are absolutely going to love. Now, these are inspired by our recent trip to the pumpkin patch. I took my daughter Elle and my son Cole to the pumpkin patch, and we had an absolute blast. And of course, all I wanted to do afterwards was eat all the pumpkin spice things. So that's how these scones came to be. Now, to get started, I'm gonna be mixing up my wet ingredients here. So first up, of course, because these are pumpkin spice scones, I have got some pumpkin. Now, I will admit I am using some canned pumpkin puree in this recipe just because it makes life a little bit easier. But if you wanted to roast your own pumpkins and scoop out the flesh, you definitely could do that, totally up to you. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and add some cream to this. I really like using half and half cream in this recipe, but you could use full fat if you wanted to, totally up to you. Next, I've got a couple of eggs headed in here. I like to crack my eggs into a separate bowl first. That way I avoid getting any shells into my mixture. Then I'm gonna go ahead and add some sugar to this. So I'm opting for brown sugar in this recipe. You could use white sugar, but I find with pumpkin spice, that little hit of molasses that's in brown sugar makes it taste extra good. Finally, I'll add just a splash of vanilla extract to this and give it a good whisk. This is sort of almost like the beginnings of a pumpkin pie. All right, so our wet ingredients are all mixed up. Now I'll get to work on mixing up my dry ingredients. So in a nice big bowl, I have got some all-purpose flour. And not to worry guys, if you're looking for the measurements, I always include those in the description box below the video. So you can just click the show more button and you'll find a link to the full recipe. To my flour, I'm gonna go ahead and add a big heaping helping of pumpkin pie spice. Now you always have the option here to use a store-bought pumpkin pie spice, that's totally fine. But I personally always find them a little on the weak side. They're just not quite spicy enough for my taste. So I actually prefer to make my own pumpkin spice blend. And if you wanna give that a try, I will link it below the video. You can check out my recipe. It's really simple. It's just a combination of cinnamon, ginger, cloves, nutmeg, a little bit of allspice, super tasty. Now we are going to go ahead and add some baking powder to this because we want these to be nice and light and fluffy. And of course, baking powder helps us achieve that. And a little bit of salt for good measure. We're gonna go in here with our whisk and make sure that all of our dry ingredients are really well incorporated before we start to add our butter. So the secret to getting really, really tender scones is to use super cold butter. So you wanna make sure your butter is nice and chilled when it hits the bowl. And then I'll just go ahead and work this butter into my flour using my hands. You could totally let the kids help with this, or just put on your favorite tunes and rock out in the kitchen while you just basically break that butter up into the flour mixture until it resembles coarse crumbs. At this point, it's time to go ahead and add my wet ingredients to my dry ingredients, and you'll start to very quickly see a nice dough forming. Your dough may be a little on the sticky side, but not to worry, that will totally work here. And the last step here is totally optional, but in my opinion is totally delicious. I like adding some chopped pecans to these scones. Now, this is not something you have to do. If you wanna leave the nuts out, you go ahead. But I always feel like anything pumpkin spice should also have some pecans in it. I don't know why that is. And that's it. Once I've just folded my pecans in, I'll just go ahead at this point and turn this out onto a board while I create my scone shapes. Now friends, it's time to form my scones. So to do that, I'm just going to take half of my dough and I'm going to place it on a well-floured surface. And what I like to do is just sort of press it like this into a disc. You're looking for something that's about 6 inches across. And once it's pressed into a disc, you can go ahead and cut it into these nice little triangular shapes. I'll arrange each one of my scones on a parchment-lined baking sheet, and then I'll repeat that process with the other half of my dough. So what I end up with are 12 scones. And the next step is really crucial. As tempting as it is to just get these in the oven and get eating, it's really important if you want beautiful, sort of tender scones to get these into the freezer for at least 20 to 30 minutes before you bake them. You want them to be super cold when they hit the oven. That's how you're gonna get a really sort of flaky, tender center. After 20 minutes, you can go ahead and remove your scones from the freezer. And the final step is just going to be brushing the tops and sides of them with either a little bit of milk or some cream. This is going to give them a nice shiny finish. Into the oven these go, preheated to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to let them cook for between 17 and 20 minutes. Now, if your scones start to brown too quickly on top, you can go ahead and just lay a sheet of aluminum foil really loosely over the top. That will prevent that browning from happening and make sure your scones are completely cooked. So while those beauties are baking away, I'm going to get to work on the final step of this recipe. But to do that, I'm making this wonderful maple syrup glaze that of course cannot be resisted. In my bowl, I've got some icing sugar. Into that, I'm just going to add some good maple syrup. I am Canadian after all, we know our maple syrup here. And I'm going to start by adding about a tablespoon of half and half cream to this. I'm going to basically mix my glaze just until I've reached the consistency that I want. Now, some people like a nice runny glaze. I like mine a little thicker so I can pipe it on. Usually that means about 2 tablespoons of cream. And I'm just going to whisk this until the glaze sort of starts to come together. I love that the maple syrup gives it that beautiful sort of maple essence that's super complementary with the pumpkin spice flavors in this recipe. I promise you, no one's gonna be sad about that. Oh, that's good stuff. Once my scones are out of the oven and cooled completely, I finish them off with a nice helping of this amazing maple glaze. And honestly, friends, this is such a winner. The texture of these scones is absolutely incredible and the flavor is even better. Oh my gosh, is there anything better than a scone fresh out of the oven? I don't think so. I hope you love them as much as I do and that you'll give them a try for yourselves. If you do, be sure to tweet me, Instagram me, or Facebook me a photo because you guys know how much I love seeing your kitchen creations. Remember, the full recipe is linked in the description box below. You can find it there. And finally, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe because there is lots more deliciousness where this came from.